Where are we at in society today? Come after me! I'm a man! I'm 40!
On Monday, January 10th, 2004, Oklahoma State Athletic Director Harry Birdwell recommended the university promote 37-year-old Mike Gundy to head coach of the football team after Les Miles left for the LSU job. Gundy was a Cowboy through and through. He'd been at the helm of the program's offensive explosion in the mid to late 80s as a player, throwing darts to Hartley Dykes, and perfectly handing the ball off to star running backs Thurman Thomas and Barry Sanders. Immediately after wrapping up his own career as Oklahoma State's all-time leading passer, Gundy joined the Oklahoma State staff under Pat Jones, starting as the wide receivers coach in 1990 before becoming the QB coach in 91. In 94, he added offensive coordinator to his title, but went back to focusing on QBs in 95. Gundy took a brief sabbatical from Stillwater in 96, joining Baylor and then Maryland, before coming back in 2001 under Les Miles. From 1986 to 2004, Gundy spent 14 of his 18 years with the Oklahoma State program, growing from a young freshman signal caller into the 22nd head coach in the history of Oklahoma State. At his very first press conference as a head coach, Gundy said, "This is my dream job. People in this profession will tell you that you are never supposed to let the administration know that you are at your final destination. I do not have a problem with that because I am just fired up to be at Oklahoma State." Going into his first season, Gundy's pokes were full of question marks. First was all the talent they were losing to the NFL. Running back Vernon Morency, who had racked up 1,474 yards and 12 TDs in his junior season, was picked by the Texans in the third round. He had a brief 3-year career in the NFL as a backup running back with the Houston Texans and Green Bay Packers, before transitioning into the real estate business in 2007, joining the group that developed Boone Pickens Stadium during the late 2000s. Meanwhile, the 49ers picked tight end Billy Badgema in the 7th round after he made the first team All-Big 12 roster as a senior. Over his 9-year career, Badgema was mostly a blocker, but he did help the Ravens win a Super Bowl in 2012. That said, the biggest loss was defensive back Darren Williams. He dealt with injuries during his senior season in 2004, limiting him to just 7 games. Still, Williams finished his collegiate career tied for first place all-time in career interceptions returned for touchdowns with 5. The Broncos added the playmaker in the 2nd round of the draft. As a rookie, Williams established himself as a starter, grabbing 2 interceptions on his way to a first-team all-rookie selection. He was even better in his 2nd season, but a few hours after a season-ending loss to the 49ers, Williams was killed in a drive-by shooting after leaving a nightclub where he was attending a New Year's Eve party and birthday celebration for Denver Nuggets player Kenyon Martin. He was only 24 years old at the time of his death. In Stillwater, Gundy's team was trying to figure out how to replace that production. As far as known talent goes, the offense had receiver DeJuan Woods and quarterback Donovan Woods. Beyond that, it was a bunch of unknowns, none bigger than quarterback Bobby Reid. Reid had come in during Les Miles' final year with the program. To date, he is the only 5-star recruit in Oklahoma State history, at least as ranked by modern recruiting services like Rivals. The 6'3" dual-threat quarterback showed shades of Vince Young during his days at North Shore High School in Houston, Texas, and hopes were high that he could become a force for the program. During his freshman preseason, Reid injured his shoulder and took a red shirt. He considered following Miles to LSU or going to another program, but Gundy called him and assured him he had the potential to be the program's future. The problem was that Gundy brought in Larry Fedora to be the team's offensive coordinator. Fedora's offense didn't quite suit Reid's skill set, so he started the season behind Woods, with the hope that he would continue to develop. During the team's first game against Montana State, Gundy and Fedora used both players on the field at the same time, but Woods got most of the snaps in the 15-10 win. It wasn't an impressive game, but the Gundy era was off to a good start. Woods was dreadful in the next game against Florida Atlantic, throwing for just 46 yards, but Mike Hamilton ran for 104, and Reid came in midway through the game to play a little bit better, earning a 23-3 win. Reid got the start against Arkansas State. He didn't look great, but did toss a 41-yard bomb to Dewan Woods en route to a 20-10 win that was largely earned by the defense. The offense's youth finally caught up to the Pokes against Colorado. Reid completed just 48% of his passes and tossed 2 interceptions. Between Hamilton and Reid, the Pokes ran for 62 yards on 25 carries. The defense played well in the first, but was worn down by Hugh Charles and Joel Klatt in the 34-0 drubbing. Next up was Mizzou, who built a 31-9 lead midway through the third, thanks to the arm and legs of quarterback Brad Smith. Then, the Pokes started plugging away, finishing 2 straight drives with Julius Juice Crossland touchdown runs to make it 31-24 heading into the fourth. With 13 minutes remaining, Bobby Reid went down with a foot injury. The Tigers scored again a few minutes later, but Al Pena came in to replace Reid and threw a touchdown to Dewan Woods. Oklahoma State got the ball back with a chance to tie or win, but Pena threw a pick to end the comeback attempt. Reid missed the next several games, which was bad for Oklahoma State. Pena threw 4 picks in a 62-23 loss to Texas A&M and 4 more in a 37-10 loss to Iowa State. Interestingly, that was also the first game Donovan Woods started at free safety, making the choice to switch from quarterback after losing the starting job early in the season. Now, Pena didn't throw an INT against Texas, but his 3 scores and 195 yards rushing for Mike Hamilton couldn't overcome Vince Young throwing for 239 yards and rushing for 267 while putting up 4 total touchdowns to give the Horns a 47-28 win. Next up was Texas Tech, which came into the game ranked 13th and had one of the nation's best offenses. What else is new? Somewhat surprisingly, the Pokes ground the Raiders' attack to a halt. Defensive end Victor DeGreat lived in the backfield, picking up 2 sacks, and Donovan Woods got his first career interception. Bobby Reid was back and effective at times, but Pena replaced him in the fourth after a fumble let Texas Tech tie it back up. When Oklahoma State got the ball back, Gundy turned on the juice, giving his bruising running back 6 carries for 46 yards to run down the clock. Pena ran it in from 1 yard out with 23 seconds to go to pick up the upset win 24-17. Against Baylor, Reid threw 2 picks and was replaced in the second quarter by Pena. The junior quarterback was also picked off twice as Oklahoma State turned the ball over 8 times. Granted, Pena did throw 4 touchdowns, but by the point he started scoring, the Pokes were in a 38-0 hole, so most of that damage was done in garbage time. Oklahoma State ended the season against Oklahoma. Pena got the start, but it didn't really matter. As Gundy said after the game, it's really very simple. When Adrian Peterson took over the game, he took it over and made it very difficult for us to catch up. The sophomore back ran for 237 yards and 2 scores on just 24 carries. With that, Gundy's first season was over. The Pokes were 4-7, and were leaving off the season much like the last. They still didn't know exactly what they had in Bobby Reid. He was impressive at times, but struggled to run Fedora's offense consistently. The good news for Reid is that Pena was transferring. Plus, he was getting back a few favorite targets in Dewan Woods and tight end Brandon Pettigrew, who had started to come on at the end of the previous season. Unfortunately, the quarterback controversy was only over temporarily. The 2006 class was filled with potential. Offensive lineman Russell Okung and running back Keith Toston seemed like day one contributors. JUCO running back Dontrell Savage also looked like a promising addition to the backfield, and Mike Gundy's passing game was about to add a Darius Bowman, who had transferred from North Carolina a few years ago and sat out the previous season. On the defensive side of the ball, sack artist Victor DeGreat and Nathan Peterson were back, and the secondary looked loaded with Donovan Woods, Parrish Cox, Andre Sexton, and Martell Van Zant, one of the rare deaf college football players. Van Zant had been deaf throughout his life and grew into a top athlete in Texas, first becoming a star soccer player. In 8th grade, he started playing football and showed off exceptional ball skills. Les Miles was the first coach to offer him a scholarship during his junior season, and he decided to stick with the program. After playing briefly as a true freshman and getting some starting reps in 05, Van Zandt was set to become a full-time starter. The 06 season started very well against Missouri State. Parrish Cox took the opening kickback 96 yards for a score. Reid threw for 4 touchdown passes, while Tostin and Juice added 2 scores on the ground in the 52-10 win. Reid did toss 3 picks to 2 touchdowns against Arkansas State the next week, but the defense dominated in the 35-7 victory. The Pokes then ran all over Florida Atlantic, with Mike Hamilton, Dontrell Savage, and Reid all getting rushing touchdowns in the 48-8 win. The next week against Houston, Reid threw for 281 yards and 3 scores, 2 to DeJuan Woods and 1 to Bowman, while adding 85 yards on the ground. Unfortunately, the defense could not slow down quarterback Kevin Kolb, and as Gundy said, we got our butts kicked. OSU dropped its first game of the season, 34-25. The Pokes built up a 27-17 lead late in the fourth against K-State. Then, freshman Josh Freeman, making his first start of the season, led the Wildcats to 2 touchdowns in less than 2 minutes to take the lead. Bobby Reid's pass to Bowman in the end zone was knocked away, and Oklahoma State fell 31-27. Reid got back on track with 6 total scores against Kansas, though it was Bowman who had the career day, with 13 catches for 300 yards and 4 TDs. 23rd ranked Texas A&M rolled in for homecoming the next week. Early in the second quarter, Reid was knocked out of the game with a mild concussion, which meant redshirt freshman Zac Robinson had to take center stage. The Aggies took a 10-6 lead into halftime, but Robinson hit John Johnson for a 12-yard score early in the third. After a TAMU field goal, Robinson found Bowman for a 22-yard score to end the third. Jaworski Lane rumbled to a fourth quarter TD to tie things up, and then Dontrell Savage ripped off a 60-yard scamper to put Oklahoma State up by 7 with 3 minutes left on the clock. However, Stephen McGee found Joey Thomas for a score with 3 seconds left, sending the game to OT. Lane barreled into the end zone to start overtime, and Robinson responded with a 15-yard touchdown pass to Bowman. Unfortunately, junior kicker Jason Ricks missed the extra point attempt, and the Aggies won 34-33 in a stunner. The next week, the Pokes picked up their second win over Nebraska since 1961, largely on the back of Savage, who ran for 117 yards and 2 scores. Reid also deserves some credit, tossing 2 TD passes to Tostin and Bowman while adding 61 yards rushing of his own. Against Texas and DKR, the Pokes could only muster a Jason Ricks field goal and an 89-yard kickoff return from Grant Jones, while Colt McCoy ripped the defense to shreds in a 36-10 beatdown. The D regrouped the next week against Baylor, forcing 6 turnovers. Parrish Cox, Martell Van Zandt, and Darnell Smith all got interceptions, with Smith taking his back for a score. Donovan Woods also got in on the party, taking a fumble recovery back 57 yards for a TD. Reid, Savage, and Tostin all played well, but the game was over before halftime. In the next game, the Pokes built a 17-0 lead early in the second against Texas Tech before Graham Harrell went on an absolute tear, putting the Red Raiders up 27-17 heading into the fourth. Reid drove down the field, connecting with Bowman for a 34-yard score to get the Pokes within 3. Following a Tech field goal, Reid marched down the field again, getting to the Raiders' 17-yard line with 1 second left. He heaved a pass to the back of the end zone, but no one was able to come down with it, and Tech held on for the win. The regular season finale against OU was kind of a weird one, as Bedlam games often are. Gundy decided to play both Robinson and Reid nearly equally in an attempt to keep the 13th ranked Sooners on their toes. The Pokes were down 20-7 early in the third after a 65-yard run from Alan Patrick. Then, Robinson tossed a 54-yard bomb to DeJuan Woods, and Reid finished the drive with a 1-yard score. Chris Brown stretched the Sooners' lead back to 27-14 with a score to end the third, but Reid found DeJuan Woods for a 2-yard TD with more than 6 minutes on the clock. Despite proving himself capable of moving the ball in the high-pressure environment, Gundy elected to go with Robinson over Reid in the clutch. Robinson had a shot to win it late, but overthrew Woods in the final seconds, sealing another OU victory. Still, Gundy's men earned a bowl bid with a 6-6 regular season. They met Alabama in the Independence Bowl. The Pokes built a 24-14 halftime lead thanks to Dontrell Savage and Keith Toston. After a Bama field goal, Reid found Bowman for a 10-yard score to stretch the lead to 31-17. The defense held tight on the next possession, but Javier Arenas returned the Pokes' next punt 86 yards for a score. Bama tied it up and intercepted Reid on the next drive. However, the Pokes' defense held firm, and Reid flew down the field, making a clutch throw to Savage. Jason Ricks redeemed himself for that overtime miss and booted it through with 8 seconds to go to give Gundy his first bowl win. At season's end, Reid looked like a potential star, racking up 2,266 yards and 24 touchdowns through the air and 500 yards and 5 scores on the ground. Savage, Hamilton, and Toston also all rushed for more than 500 yards, with Savage leading the pack at 820. Bowman had 60 catches for 1,181 yards and 12 TDs, leading the conference in yards per reception at 19.7. Woods and Pettigrew were also solid pass catchers. Defensively, Van Zant, Donovan Woods, and Cox led the secondary with 2 picks each, while the great racked up 9.5 sacks. And Andre Sexton had just one Big 12 Freshman of the Year. With the exceptions of LeGrate and Hamilton, everyone was coming back in 2007. Gundy's recruiting class also included exciting players like Dez Bryant, Kendall Hunter, Rashedi Jones, and kicker Dan Bailey. The Pokes started the season against 13th ranked Georgia at Sanford Stadium. Going up against a young Matthew Stafford, Oklahoma State fell off in the second half, losing 35-14. Reid picked up an injury early against Florida Atlantic, and Robinson threw 3 touchdowns, 2 to Bowman and 1 to Kendall Hunter, to grab a 42-6 win. After the game, Gundy said, "Bobby is still our starter. The quarterback situation has not changed." At least, that's what he said publicly. Reid says that Gundy and Fedora called him into a meeting on Monday after the FAU game and asked him how he felt. Reid said he was ready to go for Troy, and Gundy informed him that he would be taking a back seat to Robinson. Robinson threw 2 picks, and the Pokes fumbled 3 times in a disappointing 41-23 loss to Omar Hagabook and the Troy Trojans. Reid went to the coach and asked why he wasn't playing, with Gundy reportedly saying he thought Robinson was doing much better with the offense. Regardless of what you believe about that conversation, the fact is, Gundy stuck with Robinson going into an important matchup against Texas Tech. That game was an offensive explosion. Graham Harrell started off the festivities with a touchdown pass to Michael Crabtree. Dontrell Savage and Shannon Woods traded rushing touchdowns to end the first. Then, Robinson hit Dez Bryant for a 5-yard TD pass, and Kendall Hunter sprinted 46 yards for another score. Crabtree caught a second touchdown pass before Robinson took off for his own 48-yard touchdown run. Graham Harrell ended the half with 2 more touchdowns, 1 to Eric Morris and a third to Crabtree, to give Tech a 35-28 lead going into the half. Robinson's second rushing touchdown was the only score of the third quarter. The Pokes used a trick play that saw receiver Seth Newton toss a 33-yard touchdown pass to Jeremy Broadway to briefly give Oklahoma State a lead. 30 seconds later, Harrell found Danny Amendola to tie things back up. The Raiders hit a 19-yard field goal with 5 minutes remaining to take a 45-42 lead, but they had left too much time on the clock. Robinson found Brandon Pettigrew for a 54-yard score to put Oklahoma State on top, and the defense held, preserving the 49-45 victory. However, nobody really talked about what happened on the field that day, because after the game, Mike Gundy took to the press room to deliver his iconic "I'm a man, I'm 40" rant. His ire was directed toward Jenny Carlson, a reporter for the Oklahoman at the time, who had written what felt like a hit piece on Reid's attitude that had gone out soon before the game. Gundy defended his player, calling the article garbage and saying Reid had done everything right.
Who's the kid here? Are you kidding me? That's all I got to say.
And while it went immediately viral, the rant Gundy made trying to defend Reid unfortunately kind of did the opposite. See, Reid would later claim that the rant felt a little fake, suggesting Carlson's info may have come from sources inside Gundy's staff. I'll get into what happened during the season soon, but Gundy's rant caused Reid to sink into depression. His coach had just defended him in front of a national audience, but wouldn't give him back the reins to the offense? Granted, Robinson was playing well, but it was still a gut punch for a guy who, according to his coach, was doing everything right. Reid eventually transferred to Texas Southern for a solid senior season before spending some time in the Arena League. Though to be fair to the coaching staff, in 2013 Reid did join Gundy's staff in an administrative position. 2 years later, he started coaching at SMU under Van Malone before becoming a high school coach. But still, it's definitely a case of what might have been had things gone a little differently for the former star recruit. After the Tech game, Oklahoma State reeled off an easy 39-3 win over Sam Houston State before heading to Kyle Field to take on Texas A&M. The Pokes built a 17-0 lead heading into the half, thanks to 2 Adarius Bowman touchdown grabs. Robinson tossed one of them, but the other came from Dontrell Savage. In the second half, our old friend Javorsky Lane started to bowl over defenders, getting the Aggies within 3 to start the fourth after 2 touchdown runs. Then, Zac Robinson was knocked out of the game with an injury. Following a third lane TD to put TAMU up 24-20, Reid led the team down the field. Gundy settled for a field goal with 3 minutes remaining, and the defense did its job, but safety Quentin Moore roughed the punter, giving the Aggies the ball back where they iced it for the 24-23 win. The Pokes rode a strong rushing attack and a solid defense to a 45-14 win over Nebraska. Oh, how the mighty had fallen, setting up a homecoming matchup with 25th ranked Kansas State. The Wildcats went up 14-0 in the first half before Robinson found Bryant for a score. Then, Jordy Nelson caught a 46-yard pass from Josh Freeman to stretch the lead back to 14. Parrish Cox returned the ensuing kickoff 98 yards for a score. A Jason Ricks field goal to end the half made it 21-17 K-State. The two teams traded TDs in the third before another Dez Bryant touchdown grab put the Pokes up 31-28. K-State hit a field goal to tie it back up. Robinson found Pettigrew for a TD with 4 minutes on the clock to put Oklahoma State up 38-31. The Wildcats drove down the field to score with a minute left. Coach Ron Prince went for the W, and Jordy Nelson converted the 2-point opportunity. The Pokes responded by driving right down the field, and Jason Ricks hit a 26-yard field goal as time expired to give Oklahoma State a dramatic 41-39 win. 14th ranked Texas was next. Oklahoma State started the game with 21 straight points, thanks to rushing touchdowns from Savage and Robinson, and a 39-yard interception return by Jacob Lacey, who picked off Colt McCoy 3 times during this game. The Longhorns came back with 2 touchdowns before Robinson found Pettigrew to end the first half 28-14 Cowboys. Robinson's 28-yard pass to Bowman were the only points scored in the third, giving Oklahoma State a 35-14 lead going into the fourth quarter. Texas scored 24 points in the final period, ripping the Pokes' hearts out in a 38-35 loss. Oklahoma State turned the ball over 4 times in a 43-28 loss to 5th-ranked Kansas the next week, and then beat up Baylor 45-14 after that. 10th-ranked OU ended Oklahoma State's regular season with a 49-17 beatdown, but the Cowboys were still bowl eligible, and they headed to the Inside Bowl to take on Indiana. After the Hoosiers kicked a field goal, the Pokes scored 28 straight points, building a 35-10 lead at halftime. Indiana flirted with a comeback, but the Cowboys romped to a 49-33 win, with Dez Bryant's 117-yard and 2-touchdown game showing the national media a glimpse of his potential. On the season, the Pokes were impressive across the board. Robinson threw for 2,824 yards and 23 TDs, adding 847 yards and 9 scores on the ground. Dontrell Savage led the team in rushing with 1,272 yards and 9 TDs, but Kendall Hunter's 6.5 yards per carry had fans very excited for his future. Bowman only put up 67 catches for 1,006 yards and 8 TDs, but he'd been dealing with injuries following the Kansas game. Meanwhile, Dez Bryant and Brandon Pettigrew put up 500 plus yards and 4 TDs each. Jacob Lacey, Andre Sexton, and Parrish Cox all had multiple picks in the secondary, while defensive lineman Nathan Peterson racked up double-digit tackles for loss, and Donovan Woods led the team in tackles from his new linebacker position. Savage, Bowman, and Woods were all off to the pros, and while none of them were drafted, they all played a bit professionally, with Woods winning a Super Bowl with the Steelers in 2008. Hopes were high that Gundy could mix a high-powered offense with a turnover-happy defense and make a splash in 08. It was gonna be an adjustment though, as Larry Fedora left his offensive coordinator position to become the head coach at Southern Mississippi. Gundy made an internal promotion, moving wide receiver coach Gunter Brewer into the OC role. Fortunately, the Pokes put any concern about regression to bed very quickly. They rolled to 5 straight big victories to start the season: 39-13 against Washington State, 56-37 against Houston, 57-13 against Missouri State, 55-24 to get revenge on Troy, and 56-28 to embarrass Texas A&M. It was a stunning start to this season for Gundy's men. Robinson, Hunter, Bryant, and Toston were obliterating teams. Kicker Dan Bailey couldn't miss. Punter Matt Fodge was emerging as one of the best in the nation. Bryant and Parrish Cox were both game changers as returners. And that defense, it forced 10 turnovers, including 5 against Texas A&M, where Patrick Levine and Hugo Chinasa returned theirs for scores. That set up a match between 17th ranked Oklahoma State and 3rd ranked Missouri. Chase Daniel and the Tigers were at home and playing well to start the season. Mizzou started the game with a field goal, but Robinson answered with a rushing score. Derek Washington got the Tigers back out in front before halftime, but Kendall Hunter quickly answered in the third with a 68-yard TD run. Jimmy Jackson responded later in the third, and then Robinson hit Damian Davis for back-to-back touchdowns, putting the Pokes up 28-17. Chase Daniel scored to make it 28-23 after a missed 2-point conversion, but the Pokes held on, scoring a massive away win. The defense turned the tide, picking off Daniels 3 times despite his throwing for nearly 400 yards. After blasting Baylor 34-6 at homecoming, Oklahoma State traveled to DKR to take on the number 1 ranked Texas Longhorns. The Pokes were sitting at 7th, so it was a huge matchup that nearly 100,000 people came out to see. Colt McCoy got the party started with a touchdown to his best friend Jordan Shipley. And yes, I am quite positive the announcers mentioned that these two grew up together at least 60 times during this game. Another Horn score increased the lead to 14-0, but Kendall Hunter got the Pokes on the board with a 23-yard run. The two teams traded TDs in the final 4 minutes of the half, giving Texas a 21-14 advantage at the break. McCoy opened the second half with a running touchdown, which was quickly followed by a Toston score. The Longhorns could not do anything in the fourth quarter offensively, but their defense held the Cowboys to just a field goal, barely preserving a 28-24 win and the top spot in the polls. Oklahoma State blasted Iowa State 59-17 the next week, but Graham Harrell and Michael Crabtree's second-ranked Texas Tech Red Raiders ripped them to shreds. The duo combined for 3 touchdowns, and Harrell added 3 more to give the Raiders a 56-20 win. Now, to get ahead of myself slightly, that game likely decided that year's Biletnikoff Award. With Crabtree dominating, Dez Bryant was simply average. At season's end, Bryant had 10 fewer catches, but more yards, and was tied with Crabtree on 19 touchdowns. And for what it's worth, he'd also been a dynamic punt returner. But Crabtree easily outshone them in their seasonal matchup, so it's not too surprising the Raiders receiver picked up his second straight Biletnikoff Award. The Pokes finished the season with a big win over Colorado and a massive home loss to the Sooners. You might want more of a breakdown, but OU won by 20 in a wild fourth quarter. Bryant got the Pokes within 3 to start the final period before Sam Bradford found Brody Elridge to stretch the lead. Parrish Cox returned the ensuing kickoff to cut the deficit back to 3. Then OU scored 17 unanswered points to put the game away. The Cowboys had 9 wins and could chase a 10th against Oregon in the Holiday Bowl. Unfortunately, Jeremiah Massiola and LeGarrette Blount ran all over the Pokes. Oklahoma State built a 17-7 lead in the first, but the second half was almost all Ducks, ending in a 42-31 loss for Gundy's men. Still, it was a successful season. Dez Bryant, Parrish Cox, and Kendall Hunter were all named All-Americans. I've already told you Dez's stat line, but Hunter posted 1,555 yards and 16 scores. Backup Keith Toston added 686 and 9 TDs. Meanwhile, Robinson threw for 3,064 yards and 25 scores. Brandon Pettigrew somehow didn't have a receiving touchdown, but he was good enough to be drafted 20th overall by the Lions. He made the All-Rookie team in 2009 and caught 301 passes for 2,965 yards and 17 scores over his 7-year career in Detroit. On defense, guys like Andre Sexton, Ori Lemon, Jacob Lacey, and of course Parrish Cox continue to impress. Oh, and Matt Fodge won the Ray Guy Award as the best punter in the nation. And many of those key pieces were coming back in 2009. Most excitingly, Robinson, Hunter, and Bryant were ready to run roughshod on the Big 12. I also have to mention how excited I, and probably most Oklahoma State fans were, about one guy in the recruiting class. Dexter Pratt was one of the best running back prospects in the nation, and decided to go to OSU after dropping his commitment to LSU. He had prototype size and was an all-state athlete in basketball and track. Unfortunately, he was charged with misdemeanor possession during the summer before his freshman season, and to jump ahead a bit, he left the program after his redshirt season. As far as I can tell, he unfortunately never played college football. But back in 2009, the Cowboys started the season ranked 9th, and 13th ranked Georgia was visiting for the opener. It wasn't quite a beatdown, but the Pokes forced 3 turnovers, with new DC Bill Young leading a ball-hawking unit and Robinson connecting with Bryant for 2 scores in a relatively comfortable 24-10 win. After the game, Bryant said, "I was jacked up, pumped up, I was just unknown. I was ready to go. I was ready to strap my pads up yesterday." Unfortunately for the Cowboys, Dez would strap those pads up just 2 more times for Oklahoma State. Dez did play in the Pokes' shocking loss to Case Keenum in Houston, who scored 21 points in the 4th to pull off the massive upset. He also had 2 touchdowns in the 41-24 drubbing of Rice the next week, but after that, the NCAA ruled him ineligible for the rest of the season. See, Dez had gone to lunch at Deion Sanders' house over the summer, which is not an NCAA violation. However, Dez didn't know it wasn't, and when he was interviewed about the visit by the NCAA, he lied about going to Sanders' place. Despite breaking no rules outside of the lie about a rule he didn't break, the NCAA ruled that he could not play for Oklahoma State after those first 3 games, throwing cold water on what was supposed to be a season where he challenged for the Biletnikoff and potentially the Heisman Trophy. To add injury to insult, Kendall Hunter picked up a ding in the Houston game, missing the next few weeks. Thankfully, Oklahoma State didn't really have to worry, as the Pokes rolled to 5 straight victories, including a tight 36-31 win over Texas A&M at Kyle Field. The Cowboys faithful also got to see a glimpse of the future against Grambling State as freshman running back Jeremy Smith stepped in to rush for 160 yards and a score, QB Brandon Weeden tossed 2 TDs in garbage time, and wideout Justin Blackmon started to make some noise. Then the Cowboys played the number 3 ranked Texas Longhorns. Colt McCoy diced them up, and Robinson had 2 of his 3 picks returned for touchdowns. Blackmon did get his first touchdown catch late in the 4th, but the 41-14 drubbing was a vicious return to earth for the Pokes. After that Halloween night massacre, in which Kendall Hunter made his return for 1 carry before getting injured again, the Pokes went to Iowa State. Hunter was back in the lineup, but it was Keith Toston who ran for 206 yards and 3 scores in the 34-8 win. Plus, young receivers like redshirt sophomore Hubert Anium, freshman Tracy Moore, and the aforementioned Blackmon were starting to dig out from Dez's substantial shadow. 3 picks, including 1 return for a touchdown by Patrick Levine, keyed a 24-17 win over Texas Tech. The bad news is that Robinson was knocked out of the game and would miss the next matchup with Colorado. Gundy started the game with youngster Alex Cate, who was definitely a promising prospect, but missed on all 9 of his attempts and threw 1 interception. That said, the Pokes were still in it, thanks to a Parrish Cox punt return, so Gundy decided to turn to former MLB player Brandon Weeden. To be fair, Weeden mostly handed the ball off to Tosin and Hunter, who ran for over 200 yards and a score combined. However, he did hit Tosin for a 47-yard touchdown in the 4th. Colorado then returned the ensuing kickoff for a touchdown, but Weeden drove down the field and hit Justin Blackmon for the go-ahead score, something Oklahoma State fans would get very used to. The Pokes actually looked like the favorite heading into Bedlam. Robinson was back, and the 11th ranked Cowboys were 3 wins better than the Sooners to that point. Then they played the game, and DeMarco Murray led OU to a 27-0 win. Oklahoma State mustered just 109 yards of offense in a pitiful performance. They still had a chance to get to 10 wins for the first time under Gundy, with a Cotton Bowl matchup against Ole Miss. In a game where 4 different quarterbacks combined for 8 interceptions, it was the hard running of Rebels running back Dexter McCluster that turned the tide, giving Ole Miss a 21-7 win. Parrish Cox and offensive lineman Russell Okung were named to the All-American team, and unfortunately, the Pokes were losing a ton of talent to the pros. The Seahawks picked Okung 6th overall. He made 2 Pro Bowls during his 11-year career, helping the Seahawks to a Super Bowl win in 2013. The Cowboys picked Dez 24th overall. He was a star during his early career in Dallas, making 1 All-Pro and 3 Pro Bowl rosters, but injuries and some off-the-field trouble limited him to just 119 career games. The Broncos picked Cox in the 5th round. He never made a Pro Bowl, but had a solid 6-year career, racking up 10 interceptions. The Patriots picked Robinson in the 7th round. He never played a down in the NFL, but has become an NFL offensive coordinator, helping the Rams win a Super Bowl in 2021. Thankfully, Gundy still had some dudes coming back. Blackmon and Weeden had impressed in limited looks, and Kendall Hunter was seemingly healthy. The Pokes also had special teams locked down, with punter Quinn Sharp and kicker Dan Bailey. Add in several defensive thumpers in Ori Lemon, Broderick Brown, Markel Martin, Sean Lewis, and Jamie Blatnick, and hopes were high heading into 2010. It did not take long for Oklahoma State to turn heads. Weeden threw for 218 yards and 3 touchdowns, all 3 of which were caught by Blackmon, and Hunter ran for 257 yards and 4 scores against a hapless Washington State. From there, they just continued to put up points in a hurry. 41-38 over Troy, 65-28 over Tulsa, 38-35 over Tamu, 54-28 against Louisiana Lafayette, 34-17 over Tech. Weeden's touch on fade routes to Blackmon was quickly becoming the stuff of legends. Following the Troy game, in which Weeden hurt his thumb, he quipped, "Hurt thumb, no thumb, whatever. It doesn't matter. I don't care if I don't have a thumb. You have got to take the snaps." And then he threw 6 touchdowns against Tulsa the next week. The offense was humming on all cylinders under first-year OC Dana Holgrimson, and Bill Young's defense was doing enough. For some, it might have seemed weird that a failed pitcher and former 3-star receiver were dominating college football, but Gundy's made a career out of finding diamonds in the rough. He gets these guys into the program, puts them through Rob Glass's strength and conditioning routine to turn them into granite, and unleashes them on unsuspecting opponents. As we'll talk about, it doesn't work as well as it used to, but in 2010, Weeden and Blackmon were proving to be 2 of Gundy's biggest success stories. And with Blackmon impressing so much, Oklahoma State was quickly leaving behind the running back U label some had started to give them in the 80s to become wide receiver U, after producing talent like Hartley Dykes, Rashawn Woods, Dez Bryant, and now, maybe the best of them all, Justin Blackmon. But let's not get ahead of ourselves too much. The 2010 season was only half over, and 14th ranked Nebraska was coming to Boone Pickens. The Cowboys offense dominated the Huskers' top-ranked passing unit, but Taylor Martinez really let it rip, throwing for 323 yards and 5 scores while adding 112 yards on the ground in Nebraska's 51-41 win. The Pokes got back on track with 4 relatively easy wins against K-State, Baylor, Texas, and Kansas, and for what it's worth, only the Baylor game was at home. That secured Gundy's first ever 10-win season, just the 4th in school history, but they still had 14th ranked OU on the docket. It was a wild game throughout. Both Weeden and Sooners QB Landry Jones threw 3 interceptions each, one of which was the interception of the year, as Broderick Brown leapt from inside the field of play over the OU sideline and tipped the ball back onto the field to Sean Lewis. I don't know if football plays can be described as poetry, but if it can, this was that. Just one of the most jaw-dropping plays I've ever seen on the gridiron. And if the 2 QBs didn't throw a pick, most drives ended in scores. OU held a 24-17 lead going into the half, but Weeden tied it up in the 3rd with a strike to Josh Cooper. Then things really got out of control. Oklahoma kicker Jimmy Stevens booted 3 straight field goals, pushing the Sooners to a 33-24 lead with just under 6 minutes on the clock. Weeden drove the field, rifling a perfect 15-yard TD to an obviously ailing Justin Blackmon, making it 33-31 Sooners. Jones let the Cowboys fans celebrate for an entire minute before responding with an 86-yard pass to Cameron Kinney, but Justin Gilbert took the ensuing kickoff back for a score. Less than 20 seconds later, Jones sucked the air out of the stadium once again, hitting James Hanna for a 76-yard TD and stretching OU's lead back to 9. Weeden drove down the field like the veteran gunslinger he was, but Gundy settled for a field goal with 36 seconds remaining because the Pokes needed 2 scores. Ryan Broyles skied to grab the onside kick and held on through a spine-rattling hit from Charlie Moore, preserving the 47-41 heartbreaker. The Alamo Bowl matchup with Nick Foles and the Arizona Wildcats was something of a letdown. The Pokes rolled over Arizona thanks to 3 Foles interceptions and 2 Blackmon TDs. Despite the crushing loss to OU, there was still plenty to be excited about for the 11-win Cowboys. Kicker Dan Bailey, punter Quinn Sharp, Blackmon, and Hunter were all named All-Americans. Bailey won the Lou Groza Award as the nation's best kicker, and Blackmon picked up the Biletnikoff behind 111 catches, 1,782 yards, and a nation-leading 20 TD receptions. Gundy was named the Big 12 Coach of the Year, and linebacker Sean Lewis was the Big 12's Defensive Freshman of the Year. They were losing Kendall Hunter and his 1,548 yards and 16 TDs to the draft. The 49ers picked him in the 4th round, and he played for 4 years as a backup. Dan Bailey wasn't drafted, but did play for 10 seasons, making the All-Pro and Pro Bowl roster in 2015 with the Dallas Cowboys. Gundy was also going to have to replace his OC as Holgorsen left, and he chose Todd Monken. Young guns Joseph Randall and Jeremy Smith were chomping at the bit for more carries, and the best player in Gundy's recruiting class was running back Herschel Sims. So Weeden and Blackmon should have plenty of help on the ground. Oklahoma State came into the 2011 season ranked 9th, and wasn't really challenged until the 4th game of the season against 8th-ranked Texas A&M at Kyle Field. The Aggies built a 20-3 lead at halftime, but couldn't stop turning the ball over in the second half. The Pokes rode those 4 turnovers to 2 Weeden TD throws, a touchdown scamper from Jeremy Smith, and 2 Quinn Sharp field goals to take a 30-20 lead midway through the 4th. Tamu got close with a touchdown pass from Ryan Tannehill, but Oklahoma State held on for the W, taking a safety to end the game 30-29. The Cowboys then hung 70 points on Kansas, romped to a 2-score win over Texas at DKR, and dropped Missouri and Baylor by more than 20 points each. Next up was Man Mountain Colin Klein and the Kansas State Wildcats. The Pokes started fast, building a 14-0 lead in the first 8 minutes. Then Klein went to work, scoring 24 straight, but this was a game of swings, and Oklahoma State grabbed that pendulum and dragged it back in its favor, scoring 20 straight of its own to go up 34-24. Colin hit Tyler Lockett to bring the Wildcats within 3. After Quinn Sharp's 4th field goal, Klein rumbled for another score, using those tree trunk-like legs to put K-State up 38-37 with 5 minutes to go. Somehow, the Wildcats let the reigning Biletnikoff winner loose for a 54-yard touchdown less than a minute later. But Klein wasn't finished. rumbling for another score to tie the game at 45. Oklahoma State got the last laugh though, with a 23-yard Joseph Randle touchdown to save the undefeated season 52-45. The Red Raiders essentially didn't show up the next week, losing 66-6. Oklahoma State then went to Iowa State for what looked like an easy win. The day before the game, a plane holding Oklahoma State women's basketball coach Kurt Budke and his assistant Miranda Cerny crashed, tragically killing them. The night of the game, Gundy said, "Honestly, the last thing anybody really wants to do, really, is play a game." Just before the broadcast started, ESPN's Joe Tessitore said, "The Oklahoma State Cowboys have arrived in Ames, Iowa with heavy hearts. These coaches and players are dealing with tragic news. In moments, another kickoff arrives before this undefeated team, while an entire university community is overcome with grief." Oklahoma State started well. Sean Lewis ran an interception back 70 yards, and Weeden threw 2 touchdown passes to Blackmon and Tracy Moore to build a 24-7 lead early in the third. But the Pokes ran out of gas on offense, and the defense couldn't stop the Cyclones in the second half. Iowa State stormed back to tie the game. Both teams scored in the first OT, but Oklahoma State couldn't pull it out in the second, losing 37-31 after a Jeff Woody score. And while the game ended Oklahoma State's perfect season and threw its chances to play for a national title into disarray, the tragic loss of life, which came just a few years after 10 members of the Oklahoma State basketball program died in another plane crash, was more than understandably the thing on everyone's mind. After a week off, the Pokes took out any frustration they had over Iowa State out on OU, winning 44-10 in a rare Bedlam blowout that went Oklahoma State's way. That secured the Big 12 title, the only one of Mike Gundy's tenure so far. But because the BCS was kind of terrible and the human polls screwed them, that was not enough to put the Cowboys ahead of Alabama, so they did not play for a national title. Instead, the nation was treated to a Bama-LSU rematch of a game that LSU won 9-0 earlier that season. To Nick Saban's credit, his team did win 21-0, but this was one of the catalysts for the college football playoff. Oklahoma State instead played Andrew Luck and the Stanford Cardinal in a much more exciting Fiesta Bowl. It was a back-and-forth game featuring 2 superstar quarterbacks, and while Stephen Taylor ran all over the Cowboys, Justin Blackmon put the team on his back with 3 touchdowns. Joseph Randle tied the game 38-38 at the end of the fourth, and Quinn Sharp hit a 22-yard field goal to win in overtime, giving Oklahoma State its first 12-win season. Oh, and the Collie Matrix chose Oklahoma State as that year's national champions, so maybe the Cowboys will claim a second national title in 2050. As far as real awards go, Blackmon picked up his second straight Biletnikoff as the nation's top receiver with 122 catches for 1,522 yards and 18 TDs. That ties him with Michael Crabtree as the only players to win the award twice. Mike Gundy also picked up the National Coach of the Year award. The Pokes had a school record 6 All-Americans with Blackmon, lineman Levi Adcock and Grant Gardner, cornerback Broderick Brown, safety Markel Martin, and kicker Quinn Sharp. While Weeden didn't join them, he threw for 4,727 yards and 37 TDs, taking his head coach's place as the all-time leader in passing yards and TD passes in Oklahoma State history. Joseph Randle led the team in rushing with 1,216 yards and 24 scores. Jamie Blatnick gave the team a disruptor up front with 8 sacks and 14 tackles for loss. Both Broderick Brown and Justin Gilbert had 5 picks each as Oklahoma State racked up 24 interceptions as a team. And Martin and linebacker Sean Lewis filled every gap, doing just about anything coordinator Bill Young needed them to do to win. Many of those guys were graduating or leaving for the NFL. The Jags made Blackmon the 5th pick. He had 64 catches for 865 yards and 5 TDs as a rookie, but struggled with alcohol abuse and was out of the NFL after 2 seasons, and is joining the Cowboys Football Ring of Honor in 2025. The Browns picked Weeden 22nd overall. He went 5-10 as a starter as a rookie, throwing 14 TDs to 17 INTs. Weeden spent the next few years mostly as a backup and practice squad player before retiring in 2018. The Titans picked Martin in the 6th round, but he didn't make the final roster. The 2012 season started with some controversy. First, Herschel Sims left the team in the summer after being charged with 2 felony counts. The Pokes still had Joseph Randle and Jeremy Smith, so it wasn't a huge hit, but it was still disappointing after his freshman season. The real problem was the quarterback situation. Gundy had Clint Shelf, who had played well as Weeden's backup in 2011, J.W. Walsh, a redshirt freshman and dynamic runner, and true freshman Wes Lunt, a pro-style passer ranked as the 12th best at his position in that year's class. Heading into the first week, Lunt got the start, but everyone got game time in OSU's 84-0 blowout against Savannah State. Walsh and Lunt didn't really separate themselves. Walsh threw for 2 TDs and 1 INT, while Lunt was a perfect 11 of 11 with no TDs or picks. To his credit, Shelf threw 5 passes for 9 yards and a score. The Pokes dominated on the ground, rushing for 9 touchdowns between Randall, Smith, Desmond Rowland, and Corey Bennett. Lunt got the start against Arizona and looked great at first, opening the game with 2 touchdowns to Tracy Moore. However, he couldn't maintain that excellence, throwing 3 picks. Despite Randall rushing for 123 yards, Monken just kept feeding Lunt passes, and to his credit, he did deliver 2 more scores to Moore, giving the duo 4 in the game, but the Pokes fell 59-38. Lunt picked up an injury early in the next game, so Walsh played most of the 65-24 thrashing of Louisiana Lafayette. Walsh nearly led the Pokes to an upset win over Texas the next week, partnering with Randall to rush for over 240 yards and 2 scores as a duo, to give the Pokes a 36-34 lead with 2 minutes remaining. However, Oklahoma State's defense faltered, and the Horns won 41-36 off a Joe Bergeron touchdown run. Walsh grinded out a 20-14 win on the road against Kansas before popping Iowa State in the mouth 31-10 on homecoming. That win didn't come without a cost, as Walsh picked up a leg injury that ruled him out. Lunt was healthy, so he took over as the starter against TCU. He was solid in the 36-14 win, but Randall's 126 yards and 1 score led the way alongside a tight defense that forced 3 turnovers. Against third-ranked K-State and that meaty man Colin Klein, the Pokes could not get out of their own way. Lunt threw for 3 interceptions before getting injured in the third quarter. Randall had an uncharacteristic fumble and could only muster 43 yards rushing. Heading into the fourth, the only exciting part of the game for Oklahoma State fans was when Tyler Lockett returned an OSU kickoff 100 yards for a score, only for Desmond Rowland to take the ensuing kickoff back 80 yards for another touchdown. Then Clint Shelf got in the game. He didn't key a big comeback, but he went blow for blow with K-State late to keep things respectable. Shelf played well in big wins over West Virginia and Texas Tech, totaling 7 touchdowns in back-to-back 50-point performances. That set up a Bedlam matchup with 14th ranked OU. Joseph Randall kicked things off with back-to-back touchdowns on the ground. Landry Jones came alive in the second quarter to deliver 3 touchdown passes, tying the game 24-24 with a strike to Kenny Stills in the closing seconds of the first half. Shelf opened the second half with a 75-yard bomb to Josh Stewart. OU got a field goal, Randall scored again, and the Sooners got another field goal. Then Jalen Saunders ran an Oklahoma State punt back 81 yards, and OU tied it up at 38 with a 2-point conversion. The Cowboys drove down the field, and Walsh made a gutsy 4-yard run to put the Pokes up by a touchdown. Landry Jones delivered a few strikes to get the ball to the Cowboys' 4-yard line. Stoops handed the ball to baby Colin Klein, Blake Bell, who bell-dozed his way to the end zone to tie it back up. Quinn Sharp answered with a field goal, but Brennan Clay's 18-yard scamper gave OU the 51-48 OT win. The Pokes could not keep up with Lachey C. Strunk and the Baylor Bears the next week, sending them to the Heart of Dallas Bowl against Purdue. 5 different Cowboys attempted passes in that game as Josh Stewart and Joseph Randall got into the mix with the 3 regular signal callers, but Shelf did most of the damage in the easy 58-14 win to end the season 8-5. Kicker Quinn Sharp was the lone All-American, making him the first 3-time All-American at Oklahoma State since Thurman Thomas. Randall had led the Big 12 in rushing with 1,417 yards and 14 TDs. Dallas picked him in the 5th round of the draft, and he ran for 822 yards and 9 scores over 3 years. If you put the 3 QBs together, they had a solid year with 4,312 yards and 34 TDs. Lunt decided to transfer after the season, but Shelf and Walsh stayed to battle it out. Thankfully, they had quite a few weapons coming back in receivers Josh Stewart and Tracy Moore, and running backs Jeremy Smith and Desmond Rowland. Defensively, the team was hoping young guys like Justin Gilbert, James Castleman, Manuel Agba, and Ashton Lampkin could continue to develop, as recruits like Trey Flowers and Vincent Taylor fit around them. Gundy was also replacing both coordinators, bringing in Mike Yursich from the D2 ranks to run the offense, and promoting linebackers coach Glenn Spencer to DC. Shelf was named the starter in Week 1 against the Mississippi State Bulldogs, but Walsh replaced him after 2 ineffective series. The dual-threat QB passed for 135 yards and rushed for 125 and a score in the 21-3 win. Both QBs played well the next week against Oklahoma State's old OC, Larry Coker, who is now the head coach for UTSA. The duo combined for over 500 yards and 6 TDs. Then the Pokes blew out Lamar 59-3 to get to 3-0 and the 11th spot in the rankings. Gundy went up against another former OC, Dana Holgerson, at West Virginia the next week. It was a weird game, where Clint Trickett just kept throwing up deep balls, until eventually they started hitting the Cowboys for big gainers. Walsh threw 2 picks, Jeremy Smith could only muster 1 yard on 15 carries, and the Mountaineers pulled off a 30-21 upset at home. Next week the Pokes were locked in a tight one with the Wildcats. Oklahoma State struggled to finish drives with touchdowns, and found themselves down 29-3 late in the 4th. Then Walsh flipped a switch and hit Charlie Moore for a score to put the Cowboys up on top. Picks from Sean Lewis and Daytwan Lowe ensured they stayed there. Many thought Gundy had finally figured out his QB situation by that point, but Walsh threw 2 first-half picks the next week against TCU, and Shelf came in to settle things down and hold on from the win. From there, Shelf was the starter, though not because he was playing great. Choo only threw for 78 yards against Iowa State, but he sure did a great job of handing the ball to Desmond Rowland, who romped to 219 yards and 4 scores. The Pokes then went on a tear, beating 3 ranked teams in Kansas while never letting anyone get closer than 18 points. Rowland rumbled for 3 TDs in a 52-34 win over Texas Tech. Shelf connected with Tracy Moore for 2 scores in a 42-6 win over Kansas. Justin Gilbert picked off 2 Colt McCoy passes, taking 1 back for a score to key a 38-13 win over 24th ranked Texas at DKR. And the Cowboys got to 10-1 with a 3-score game from Shelf against 3rd ranked Baylor, who didn't stand a chance in the 39-17 drubbing. That just left 18th ranked OU. The Pokes had the better record, were on the verge of a BCS bid, and were playing at home. I think you know where this is going. The 2 teams played to a 10-10 stalemate at halftime, but Sooners quarterback Trevor Knight was knocked out of the game soon after Oklahoma State took a 17-10 lead thanks to a Shelf to Rowland touchdown. After Kendall Thompson struggled, Bob Stoops put in Blake Bell. The 6'6 Belldozer turned the game on its head, though he somewhat surprisingly did it with his arm. The Sooners grabbed a 20-17 lead early in the 4th after a touchdown pass and a Mike Honeycutt field goal. Then Shelf completed 5 straight passes to set up a Desmond Rowland touchdown run to put OSU ahead by 4 with less than 2 minutes on the clock. Justin Gilbert almost sealed the game with an interception, but he dropped it and the Belldozer capitalized, moving down the field and hitting Jalen Saunders for a 7-yard TD with 19 seconds left on the clock. Eric Stryker intercepted Choo on the ensuing drive, ending the game with an INT touchdown return. Surprise, surprise, another Sooners win. The Pokes ended the season in the Cotton Bowl against 8th-ranked Missouri. Shelf threw for 381 yards and 2 scores, and the game was tied early in the 4th quarter. It looked like Tyler Patman picked off a James Franklin pass and returned it 40 yards to put the Pokes up by 7, but it was called back for a relatively questionable pass interference call. The Tigers scored soon after the penalty, and Shelf answered with a big drive that he capped with a rushing touchdown. After a Mizzou field goal, Oklahoma State quickly drove down the field, scoring on a Desmond Rowland run to go up by 4. The Tigers answered 2 minutes later, going up 34-31 with Henry Josie's 3rd touchdown run. With a minute remaining, the Cowboys were driving when Michael Sam sacked Shelf, forcing a fumble that Shane Ray returned 73 yards to seal the game for Missouri. After the game, a Sports Illustrated reporter asked Gundy a question. He quipped, "Make sure you document this so you have all your research and your background." Now, if you were not keeping up with Oklahoma State during the 2013 season, that joke might have gone over your head. See, during the season, a 5-part expose was released by Sports Illustrated that claimed to provide evidence about various issues plaguing the Oklahoma State program, alleging things about players not graduating or getting paid or all that kind of stuff. Called the dirty game, it seemingly had a lot of dirt on the program, but most of the claims were either false or just portraying the university in a false light. There was also the issue of bias from reporter Thayer Evans, who had previously covered Oklahoma with Sooners Illustrated. Either way, I'm only bringing it up here at the end of the season because it turned out to be mostly a nothing burger. The NCAA ruled the accusations as, quote, fundamentally unfounded. The Cowboys just missed out on another 11-win season, and unfortunately, they were losing a ton of talent. J.W. Walsh was coming back, but Chelf, who had thrown for 2,169 yards and 17 scores in the back half of the season, was graduating. Running back Jeremy Smith and wideouts Josh Stewart and Tracy Moore were all gone after solid seasons. Plus, the secondary was losing All-American cornerback Justin Gilbert and his 7 picks. The Browns picked him 8th overall in the draft, but he was largely a bust in the NFL, playing just 35 games with 1 career INT. No, 2014 it looked like a rebuilding year. Even with Walsh and Desmond rolling back, the team needed time to grow. Thankfully, there were several young guys who looked primed to explode soon. That includes weapon Tyreek Hill, running back Devin Thomas, wide receivers James Washington and Marcel Aitman, and, most of all, quarterback Mason Rudolph. Of all those guys, it's unfortunate that Thomas never played after being charged with a series of robberies and being given a 10-year prison sentence. He was released in 2017 but never played college ball. Meanwhile, on defense, the young Pokes were building around guys like safety Jordan Stearns, edge rusher Emmanuel Ogba, defensive tackles James Castleman and Vince Taylor, and rangy cornerbacks Ramon Richards, Kevin Peterson, and Ashton Lampkin. Things weren't going to be easy, as the Cowboys opened the season against Jameis Winston and the Florida State Seminoles. That team was ranked number 1 in the country and was coming off of a national title win. Walsh played well, and the defense gave Winston trouble, picking him off twice and creating pressure, most notably from Ogba, who racked up 2 sacks. However, the Knowles held off a late game charge and won 37-31. It was an encouraging sign, but then Walsh got hurt the next week against Missouri State. Gundy didn't want to bring Rudolph in, hoping to redshirt him, so Daxx Garman got his first action since his junior year of high school in 2009. To his credit, Garman played well, throwing for 244 yards and 2 TDs, showing off a solid connection with wide receivers Brandon Shepard and David Glidden in the 40-23 win. Garman kept slinging for the next few weeks, picking up wins over UTSA, Texas Tech, Iowa State, and Kansas, to get the Pokes to 5-1 and a top 15 ranking. Then they played Trevon Boykin and the TCU Horned Frogs. Despite coming into the game with an injury, the young dual-threat QB did pretty much whatever he wanted in the 42-9 win, throwing 2 touchdown bombs to Josh Doxson that went for 77 and 84 yards. Garman was officially on pumpkin watch after a 34-10 loss to West Virginia the next week, throwing 2 INTs, including a game-sealing pick in the 4th that Drayvon Henry returned for a score. He was even worse the next week in a 48-14 loss to Joe Hubner, aka the second coming of Colin Klein and the K-State Wildcats. And yes, Wildcat fans, I know Jake Waters did most of the damage that game, but please let me have my bits. Heck, Tyrone Swoops of all people even looked good against the Cowboys the next week, leading the Texas Longhorns to a 28-7 win. Even worse, Garman got hurt. Gundy didn't have anybody else to turn to, so he had to burn Mason Rudolph's red shirt against Baylor. Rudolph threw for 281 yards and 2 TDs, including a 68-yard picture-perfect bomb to James Washington, in a taste of things to come. But Bryce Petty, Shock Linwood, and Devin Chaffin were too much for the Oklahoma State defense, earning a 49-28 win for the 6th-ranked Bears. If Gundy wanted to keep his bowl streak, he had to go into Gaylord Memorial and beat the 18th-ranked OU Sooners with a true freshman quarterback. I think you know where this is going. Largely on the back of Samaj P. Ryan, the Sooners built a 28-14 lead by halftime. Neither team scored in the third. Then, something flipped. Pirine got hurt late in the third quarter, joining QB Trevor Knight and star receiver Sterling Shepard on the bench. Desmond Rowland capped a drive with a 3-yard score to trim the lead to 7. Yes, Aaron Ripkowski scored on the next drive, but Oklahoma State had some momentum. Rudolph found Brandon Shepard for a 43-yard dart with 5 minutes left to bring the Cowboys back within 7. Oklahoma State got the ball back, but the young Rudolph threw a pick. The Sooners then milked the clock to under a minute, and Bob Stoops decided to pooch punt to Tyreek Hill. So far, I haven't talked much about Cheetah's season, and that's because he was never really dominant during the season. He could do everything, and he was the fastest person on the field, but he wasn't quite the game changer fans had hoped he'd be on offense. Don't get me wrong, he was solid, second on the team in rushing and fourth in receiving, but he only had 2 scores on the season on offense. On special teams, that's a different story. Hill's speed could legitimately turn a game. He had 2 kickoff return touchdowns that year and ranked second in the nation in combined return yards. Let's just say, if you're Bob Stoops, you should not give him a chance. Hill fielded the punt on the Cowboys' 8-yard line. He sprinted in between 2 would-be tacklers and juked around a third. Around the 45-yard line, he picked up a block, springing him loose for a 92-yard score to tie the game. That sent the game into overtime. Michael Honeycutt missed his field goal attempt, and Ben Grogan nailed his, giving the Pokes a 38-35 win in Norman. That put Oklahoma State into a Cactus Bowl matchup with Washington. Rudolph led the team to a 24-point lead by halftime, and the defense did just enough to hold off a late charge from the Huskies to secure a 30-22 win. And the best part? The Pokes were returning most of their key players in 2015. That includes Jordan Stearns, Trey Flowers, Emmanuel Ogba, Vincent Taylor, Kevin Peterson, and Ashton Lampkin on defense. Offensively, it was all about Mason Rudolph and James Washington, though David Glidden and Marcel Aitman were also looking like good receivers. Walsh was also back, but this was Rudolph's team now. The big name that wasn't returning was Tyreek Hill. 5 days after becoming the hero against OU, Hill was dismissed from the team after he was charged and pleaded guilty to domestic assault against his pregnant girlfriend. For what it's worth, he has become one of the most dangerous receivers in the NFL after spending a year with West Alabama. But his time at Stillwater ended in shocking fashion that left many wondering if he'd ever make it to the pros. Still, hopes were high that the team could build on the 2014 season, and many thought JUCO running back Chris Carson could partially replace the void left by Hill in the backfield. Rudolph & Co. got off to a slow start against Central Michigan, but held on for a 24-13 win. The quarterback came alive against Central Arkansas, tossing for 401 yards and 2 scores to David Glidden in the 32-8 beatdown. And while he and Carson both had solid games against UTSA, it was the defense forcing 7 turnovers that led to the 69-14 win. Rudolph struggled at DKR against Texas, totaling 3 turnovers, which led to Walsh getting some fourth quarter PT. The Pokes were down by 3 late in the game, but drove down the field to give Ben Grogan a chance to tie it with a 41-yard field goal. He nailed it, and Texas punter Michael Dixon dropped a snap on the ensuing drive. He got the punt off, but it only went 10 yards, so Grogan trotted back out to nail the game winner with 6 seconds left. That gave Oklahoma State 4 straight wins at DKR, making them the first away team in history to do so. Rudolph threw for 437 yards and 3 scores against K-State, but the Wildcats stayed in it because Oklahoma State could not move the ball on the ground. That slab of man meat known as Joe Hubner scored with 3 minutes left to give K-State a 1-point lead, but as he often did, Grogan nailed a game winner for the second week in a row. After the game, he credited his, quote, no big deal attitude that he had to embody to become the clutchest man in Stillwater. The Pokes were again tested on the road against West Virginia. The Cowboys did not move the ball much, and Rudolph threw 3 picks. Still, the defense, most notably Ogba with a fumble return for a touchdown, and Grogan kept him in it. Skylar Howard did send the game to OT, but Walsh took over and ran for a score, and the Mountaineers could not answer. After the game, Gundy quipped, "If you're going to an Oklahoma State game, you don't turn it off until the final buzzer goes off." Walsh had maybe the best game of his career against Kansas. He totaled only 5 attempts and 6 rushes, but combined for 5 scores in those limited touches as the Cowboys won 58-10. The Texas Tech game was an offensive explosion that the Pokes won 70-53. James Washington was the big star, catching just 4 passes for 200 yards and 2 scores. Patrick Mahomes did his best, but he ended the game with an INT that Ramon Richards returned 59 yards for a score to ice the game. Oklahoma State blew out 8th-ranked TCU 49-29, mostly behind Rudolph's 352 yards and 5 TDs, 3 of which went to Washington, though the Cowboys' D deserves credit for forcing 4 Trevon Boykin interceptions. Rudolph struggled to find the end zone against Iowa State, who built a 31-21 lead going into the 4th. That just meant it was JW Walsh time, who ran in 1 score and tossed another to Jeff Carr to secure a 35-31 win. The 4th-ranked Cowboys were undefeated and hosting the 10th-ranked Baylor Bears the next game. Early in the game, the Bears lost starter Jarrett Stidham, who was actually the backup, but Seth Russell was out for the season. In stepped 3rd stringer Chris Johnson. Somehow, the unproven QB found a way to win, hitting KD Cannon and Jay Lee for touchdowns and running for a 3rd to give Baylor a shocking 45-35 win. The Pokes just couldn't run the ball and failed to capitalize with touchdowns after Baylor's 3 turnovers. Adding injury to insult, Rudolph was hurt, so Walsh would have to start the season finale against 5th-ranked OU. The Sooners had revenge on their mind and, well, let's not beat around the bush. They got it. Baker Mayfield, Samaje Perine, and Joe Mixon combined for 5 rushing touchdowns, and Mayfield threw for 2 more. OU ran the Pokes off the field in the 58-23 loss. It did not get any better in the Sugar Bowl against Ole Miss. Rudolph was still hampered by an injury, and Chad Kelly's Rebels lit the Pokes up 48-20, ending a promising season on a down note. Thankfully, the only major losses after 2015 were slot receiver David Glidden and star defensive end Emmanuel Ogbah. The Browns picked Ogbah in the 2nd round, and he's become a solid rotation player with several teams, even helping the Chiefs win the 2019 Super Bowl. I also have to give Walsh his flowers. While never quite developing into a star, the man was a red zone menace and has become a solid coach. The team would also be without the services of Marcel Aitman, who hurt his foot before the season and took a medical redshirt. Otherwise, pretty much everybody was back. Mason Rudolph, James Washington, Chris Carson, Ramon Richards, Jordan Stearns, Vincent Taylor, Ashton Lampkin, the list goes on. Fans were also excited by a few young prospects like receiver Dylan Stoner and running back Justice Hill. Oh, and Barry Sanders Jr. had transferred from Stanford to his father's alma mater, though to get it out of the way early, he didn't play much. The season opened with an easy 61-7 win over Southeastern Louisiana, setting up a matchup with Central Michigan. I think we all remember this game. The Chippewas brought their A-game and gave Oklahoma State way more than they wanted. Still, the Pokes were up by 3 and tossed a meaningless pass into the dirt on 4th down that, by rule, should have ended the game. Unfortunately, the refs weren't privy to this obscure ruling and gave Central Michigan an untimed down. Now, to CMU's credit, they caught a miracle Hail Mary and then lateraled the ball back to score a touchdown. It was one of the wildest plays you'll ever see, but it should have never happened. I don't want to say Oklahoma State was cheated out of the win, but the refs blew it. They admitted they blew it after the game, the NCAA agreed they blew the game. However, you can't change a game after the final whistle, so the Pokes were out of luck and 1-1. The Cowboys avoided a letdown the next week against Pitt. Rennie Childs' 4th quarter touchdown put the game out of reach for the Panthers. Oklahoma State had a shot against Baylor, despite Rudolph having a very rough game. With 9 minutes to go, Justice Hill took a carry on the goal line. The Pokes were down 28-24, so this would have been a go-ahead score, but Hill fumbled on the 2. Baylor drove down the field and won it 35-24. Fortunately, Texas was next, and as mentioned previously, Oklahoma State owned the Longhorns during this era, picking up a 49-31 win behind 3 Rudolph bombs and one of Barry Sanders Jr.'s 2 scores that year. The Cowboys then ripped off 3 more wins against Iowa State, Kansas, and West Virginia. The Rudolph to Washington connection was proving to be one of the deadliest in the country. I'm not sure if I've ever seen a prettier deep ball tandem. Plus, true freshman Justice Hill was emerging as a star despite his early fumbleitis. But we all know how K-State loves their chonky quarterbacks, and Oklahoma State has always had difficulty with Colin Klein and his clones. Jesse Ertz ran for 3 scores to build a 37-28 lead early in the 4th. Then, Rudolph uncorked an 82-yard nuclear blast to Washington to get within 2, and Chris Carson rumbled for another score late to give the Pokes a 43-37 comeback win. Oklahoma State looked like it had the next game sewn up, taking a 10-point lead into the fourth against Patrick Mahomes and Texas Tech, despite Mahomes throwing for 3 scores and running for 2 more. Then, the Raiders kicked a field goal, forced a punt, and scored to bring it to 45-44 OSU. Thankfully, kicker Clayton Hatfield sailed the extra point, and Oklahoma State held onto the ball for the last 2 minutes to preserve the lead. Oklahoma State dominated TCU 31-6, but was never really in the OU game the next week. Sure, it was tied at half, but Oklahoma State could muster just a field goal in the final 30 minutes, giving the Sooners a relatively easy 38-20 win. And speaking of easy wins, Oklahoma State blew the doors off of 11th-ranked Colorado in the Alamo Bowl, winning 38-8 behind 3 touchdown throws from Rudolph and nearly 200 yards receiving from Washington. It was a banner year for the duo. Rudolph threw for 4,091 yards and 28 TDs, while Washington caught 71 passes for 1,380 yards and 10 scores. And the best was yet to come. Oklahoma State was losing Chris Carson to graduation after he ran for 559 yards and 9 scores, but Justice Hill was quickly becoming a star, with 1,142 yards and 6 TDs. Defensively, they were losing a few standouts like Jordan Stearns and Vincent Taylor, though guys like Calvin Bundage, Jordan Brailford, and Trey Flowers looked ready to fill those slots. As for the draft, Vincent Taylor was picked in the 6th round by the Dolphins. He played for 5 years as a backup before leaving the NFL. Meanwhile, the Seahawks picked Carson in the 7th round. He became a 1,000-yard rusher by his 2nd season, but could only muster 2 productive years before injuries started to hit. Carson retired from football after just 5 seasons due to neck injuries. Heading into 2017, Oklahoma State had an all-star duo with Rudolph and Washington, and Marcell Ateman was coming back from his injury. Add in Justice Hill, and you have a team with the potential to do something special. And while this might have been the year Gundy most flirted with leaving for the Tennessees and the Arkansas of the world, he was back for his 13th season. The Pokes blew out their first 3 opponents by multiple scores, easily dropping Tulsa, South Alabama, and Pitt. Then, Darius Anderson and the TCU Horned Frogs came to town. The back ran for 160 yards and 3 scores, while his defense forced 4 turnovers. The classic combo of controlling the clock and playing tough D led to a 44-31 upset win for 16th-ranked TCU, knocking the Pokes out of the top 10. They nearly lost again the next week to Texas Tech, but Rudolph drove the field late in the game and scored on a 16-yard scamper to give Oklahoma State a 41-34 win. In a 59-16 blowout win over Baylor, Washington racked up 235 yards receiving, Ateman added 119 more, and Justice Hill ran for 117 yards on the ground. Heck, Taylor Corndog Cornelius, the backup QB, ran for 66 yards in garbage time. Against Texas, the Cowboys leaned on their defense, holding the Longhorns to just 10 points while the offense struggled. Still, they got the win in OT, 13-10. The Pokes rode running back J.D. King to a 142-yard performance against West Virginia, and probably assumed the game was over when Justice Hill ran for a score early in the 4th to put them up 37-24. Will Grier tried to mount a comeback, but Washington caught his 2nd TD of the day, and Hill scored again to put OSU up 50-39 and secure the win. Oklahoma State went blow for blow with Baker Mayfield and the Sooners next. Just listen to this first half scoring breakdown. Matt Amendola field goal, 49-yard Mayfield touchdown, 1-yard touchdown from Rudolph to Ateman, 5-yard touchdown from Mayfield to Jeff Badgett, 7-yard touchdown run by Mayfield, 6-yard touchdown run by Justice Hill, 84-yard touchdown pass from Mayfield to Marquise Brown, 2-yard touchdown pass from Rudolph to Ateman, 14-yard touchdown run by Rodney Anderson, 34-yard touchdown pass from Rudolph to Washington, Austin Seibert field goal, 30-yard touchdown run by Justice Hill. For those of you scoring at home, that's 76 first half points and a 38-38 tie. Unfortunately, Oklahoma State fell off the pace in the 3rd quarter, letting OU build a 10-point lead. And while the Pokes did score 14 in the 4th, so did OU. Effing Baker Mayfield. Oklahoma State was down late against 24th-ranked Iowa State, partially because Washington had one of the worst days of his career. The Cyclones went up 35-31 early in the 4th, but like Rudolph said after the game, we've been down so many times throughout my career. It doesn't matter because we know we can bounce back real quick. Get points on the board, get back in the game. They did exactly that. Amendola kicked a field goal, and Rudolph tossed 2 touchdowns to Aitman and Dylan Stoner to win 49-42. Gundy quipped, "We should raise ticket prices. We definitely give fans their money's worth." Then came the next in the long line of Colin Klein superclones, Skylar Thompson. The dude only threw 13 passes, but turned 3 of those into touchdowns and ran for 93 yards and a score to build a 45-20 lead in the fourth. To Oklahoma State's credit, they put up 17 straight points to get within 5, but couldn't move the ball when they got it back, and the Wildcats held on for the win. The Pokes took out their frustrations with a 58-17 win over Kansas to end the regular season, setting up a Camping World Bowl matchup against Virginia Tech. It was another back-and-forth affair, but OSU held on to win 30-21. Fittingly, Rudolph hit one last 65-yard bomb to Washington to end the duo's career on a high note. It was an, at times, frustrating season for the Pokes. All 3 losses came at home, in winnable games. Still, it was another 10-win season for Gundy. Rudolph, Washington, and safety Trey Flowers were all named All-Americans. Washington won the Biletnikoff with 74 catches for an NCAA leading 1,549 yards and 13 scores. Rudolph led the nation in passing yards with 4,904 and racked up 37 scores to finish as a Davey O'Brien finalist behind Mayfield. Aitman also broke 1,000 yards receiving, racking up 1,156, and Justice Hill ran for 1,467 yards and 15 TDs. Meanwhile, Flowers led the team in tackles and added 2 picks. The Steelers picked Washington in the second round of the draft. He caught 11 touchdowns over 4 years, but was never able to break out. Pittsburgh picked Rudolph in the next round. He's mostly been a career backup and is back with the Steelers in 2025 after a brief stint with the Titans. The Seahawks picked Flowers in the 5th round. He's also still in the league, currently on the Bears practice squad. Finally, the Raiders picked Aitman in the 7th round. He has 1 career score, but has been out of the NFL since 2023. Gundy went into the 2018 season with a new defensive coordinator in Jim Knowles and a lot of questions. Hill was one of the few stars returning, though defensive players like Justin Phillips and Jordan Brailford and former LSU 5-star wideout Tyron Johnson seemed poised for big seasons. Plus, young guys like receiver Tylan Wallace, running back Chuba Hubbard, and linebacker Malcolm Rodriguez, who was listed by recruiting services as a dual-threat quarterback, if you can believe it, flashed potential in the spring. The real question was quarterback Taylor Cornelius. The 6'6" corndog had monster size, making him a legit dual threat in the red zone, but the senior was jumping into the fire. Corndog started the season well, throwing 5 TDs against Missouri State in a 58-17 win. That included 2 scores to Jalen McCleskey and 1 TD each to Hubbard, Wallace, and Sione Finifuwaki. They kept rolling with big wins over South Alabama and Boise State, though Corndog did start to show some warts as a passer. Thankfully, Justice Hill, Wallace, and the rest of the skill position guys were there to bail him out. Then, in a somewhat funny twist of fate, the Pokes lost 41-17 to Alan Bowman and the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Corndog got back on track with 4 TDs in a 48-28 blowout of Kansas, though Hill's 181 yards rushing kept the Jayhawks off the field. Unfortunately, the Cowboys could not run the ball against true freshman Brock Purdy in Iowa State the next week. Corndog threw for 4 scores once again, including a 42-yard bomb to Tylan Wallace with a minute left to bring Oklahoma State within 6, but the Cyclones held on for a 48-42 win. Skylar Thompson showed Corndog what a real meaty man looks like in K-State's 31-12 win the next week, though Alex Barnes' 4 second-half TD runs certainly played a major part as well. As we've established, Oklahoma State pretty much owned Texas by this point, but the Longhorns were ranked 6th when they came into Boone Pickens. Corndog had one of his best games, and Tylan Wallace ran wild to build a 31-14 lead headed into the half. Then Sam Ehlinger stormed back, nearly pulling off the comeback. Fortunately for the Pokes, Corndog put the team on his very large back for a 10-yard run to keep Oklahoma State in front for good. The rest of the regular season was disappointing, as OSU went 1-3, but they lost those 3 games by a combined 12 points, only losing by 1 to the 6th-ranked Sooners at Gaylord Memorial after failing a late 2-point conversion. It really was the tale of the season. Win or lose, Corndog and the boys kept it tight. They just couldn't make enough good plays late. That said, guys like Tylan Wallace, Tyron Johnson, and Chuba Hubbard were quickly joining Justice Hill as star skill position players. Heck, Hubbard ran for 3 touchdowns, and Wallace caught 10 passes for 220 yards and 2 scores against the Sooners alone. The Cowboys ended the up-and-down season with a Liberty Bowl matchup against Missouri. Hubbard put up 145 yards, Johnson caught 7 balls for 141 yards and 2 scores, and the Pokes defense did just enough to hold on to a 38-33 win over the Tigers. After putting up 86 catches for 1,491 yards and 12 TDs, Tylan Wallace was the lone All-American. Tyron Johnson added 53 catches for 845 yards and 7 scores. Meanwhile, Hill led the team with 930 yards rushing and 9 scores, though he did miss several games at the end of the season. Hubbard had 740 yards and 7 scores, showing he had potential to be special. Corndog threw for just under 4,000 yards and 32 TDs, adding 10 more scores on the ground. Jordan Brailford was the big defensive standout with 9 sacks, but hopes were high Jim Knowles' defense could continue to grow with impressive young pieces like Malcolm Rodriguez, who had officially moved to a hybrid linebacker safety role, safety Colby Harvell-Peel, linebacker Amin Ongbongamiga, and defensive lineman Trace Ford. That said, the team was gonna need to make some changes. Corndog had exhausted his eligibility, so redshirt freshman Spencer Sanders seemed poised to take over. The Ravens picked Justice Hill in the 4th round. He's still with the team today, mostly as a 3rd down back. Washington picked Brailford in the 7th. He played for about 2 years, but didn't get much game time. Plus, OC Mike Yurcich, lover of screens, was off to Ohio State, so Gundy brought in Sean Gleason from Princeton to run a spread option offense. Fans immediately saw that this offense had dynamic potential. Against Oregon State, Hubbard ran for 221 yards and 3 scores, while Sanders added 109 yards rushing and threw for 3 touchdowns, with 2 going to Tylan Wallace in the 52-36 win. Hubbard barely played against McNeese, but they didn't need him, as Wallace balled out with 180 yards and 3 scores on just 5 catches. Hubbard got back into the mix against Tulsa with 256 yards and 3 scores in a 3rd big win. Next up was a game in DKR, where Oklahoma State hadn't lost since 2008. The Longhorns were ranked 12th, but no big deal. Unfortunately, Sanders' youth finally popped up. He threw 2 interceptions, and while he and Hubbard combined for 230 yards and 3 scores on the ground, the Pokes finally fell 36-30, ending the streak. Sanders continued to struggle against K-State, but Hubbard ran for 296 yards and a score, while the defense made Skylar Thompson win through the air. He couldn't do it, and OSU won 26-13. Sanders had another couple bad games and losses to Texas Tech and Baylor, though Hubbard just kept running over teams. Hubbard and Wallace were great again against Iowa State, but it was Malcolm Rodriguez's 26-yard interception return late in the 4th that secured a 34-27 win. Then, the Cowboys got some bad news. Tylan Wallace tore his ACL, taking away one of Oklahoma State's dynamic weapons and putting an even heavier burden on Hubbard. To put it in perspective, Wallace led the team in every receiving category with 53 catches for 903 yards and 8 TDs while playing in 5 games less than everyone else. He was a dude that season, and his loss could have decimated the team. Hubbard responded with 223 yards and 2 scores against TCU, though it should be noted Dylan Stoner caught 2 passes and the defense forced 4 turnovers, so he definitely had some help in that one. Stoner and the defense were again impressive in a 31-13 win over Kansas. Stoner had 150 yards and 2 scores, while Colby Harvell-Peel picked off 2 passes. It was also the first time Les Miles, now the Kansas coach, was back at T-Boone. After the game, he gave it up to the fans, saying, "I really like this place. The people here were kind to my family. I enjoyed it, and always look back and think how special this place was to my family. And I have it on good authority, he said the grass tasted great." The bad news is that Spencer Sanders went down with an injury, and like Wallace, missed the rest of the regular season. Look, no offense to redshirt senior Drew Brown, but the Pokes were essentially now the Chuba Hubbard show. To be fair, Brown was solid against West Virginia, helping the team grab a win with 10 late points. He was less successful in a 34-16 beatdown by Oklahoma. Brown and Hubbard combined to jump out to a big lead over Texas A&M in the Texas Bowl to end the season. but Kellen Mond flashed his dual threat ability to bring the Aggies back. Sanders made a return late but was stopped on 4th and 1, and Oklahoma State couldn't finish a late comeback, losing 24-21. The 8-5 season was impacted by injuries, but it was still a great season, especially for Chuba Hubbard, who became the second Cowboys running back after Barry Sanders to rush for over 2,000 yards, with 2,094 and 21 scores. And they were getting pretty much everyone back that mattered, including Hubbard, Sanders, and Wallace. That said, it was always going to be a weird season. Not only did the COVID-19 pandemic force them to cancel games against Oregon State and Western Illinois, but OC Sean Gleason left to take a position at Rutgers, so longtime wide receiver coach Casey Dunn was taking over. And trust me, every Oklahoma State fan you know just ground. It's also worth noting Gundy was photographed wearing an OAN shirt during the summer, and several players, including Hubbard, threatened to sit out. Gundy issued an apology and said he didn't know about some of OAN's coverage. He took a $1 million pay cut. Hubbard also apologized, and things were essentially settled heading into the 2020 season. Things didn't start out great against Tulsa. Sanders went down with a leg injury early in the game, and Hubbard struggled to get going. Still, Alex Hale's big leg led a big fourth quarter comeback to give Oklahoma State a 16-7 win. Sanders missed the next game against West Virginia, but the two-headed monster of Chuba Hubbard and L.D. Brown pushed the team to a 37-13 win. Shane Illingworth got one last start against Kansas and actually played pretty well, but it was Hubbard with 145 yards and 2 scores, and Tylan Wallace with 9 catches for 148 yards and 2 more scores that stole the spotlight in the 47-7 win. The Baylor game was postponed due to COVID the next week, so OSU next played Iowa State. By that point, Sanders was finally back. He and Brock Purdy had a mid-off, while their running backs ran wild. Breece Hall ran for 185 yards and a score, while Hubbard put up 139 and a touchdown. The difference? Sanders wheels. The QB ran for 71 and a score to give the Pokes a 24-21 lead. Sanders was letting it sling against Texas, throwing for 4 scores, with Tylan Wallace catching 11 passes for 187 yards and 2 scores. However, the team fumbled 3 times, which meant Sam Ehlinger just kept getting chances. To his credit, Alex Hale sent the game to overtime with a late kick, but the Cowboys couldn't answer Ehlinger's touchdown pass, losing 41-34 and tumbling out of the top 10. K-State went up 12-0 in the first half before the Pokes pulled it back in the second, thanks in large part to an 85-yard fumble return touchdown from safety Jason Taylor. Then, OU tore the Cowboys to pieces, 41-13, pretty much ending any real hopes of challenging for a Big 12 title. Hubbard went down with injury in that game as well, so Dez Jackson stepped up, and he did so big time, rushing for 235 yards and 3 touchdowns to stave off a late comeback attempt from Alan Bowman and Texas Tech in the 50-44 win. The Cowboys struggled through a 29-22 loss against TCU and demolished the Bears 40-3, who, to be fair, had been hit hard with COVID and were missing nearly 50 players. After that game, Hubbard announced that he was opting out, so they would not have him for the Cheez-It Bowl against 18th ranked Miami. Sanders had what is probably the best game of his career, throwing for 305 yards and 4 TDs while leading the team in rushing with 45 yards. Brendan Presley caught 3 of those TD passes, showing the team had somebody to replace Tylan Wallace. After the season, offensive lineman Tevin Jenkins was picked in the second round by the Bears. As of 2025, he's playing with the Browns. Hubbard fell to the Panthers in the 4th round because of his injury, but you can't teach speed, and he has slowly grown into a quality player, rushing for 1,195 yards and 10 scores in 2024. Wallace fell to the Ravens in the 4th round. He has not had as good of a career, though his game-winning punt return in 2023 made him a fan favorite, at least for that season. Finally, Rodarius Smith was picked in the 6th round by the Giants and briefly played before leaving the league in 2023. Back in Stillwater, the Pokes still had Sanders and Presley. Plus, coaches were excited by transfers like running back Jalen Warren and receiver Tay Martin. Oh, and the defense was loaded with young players like Colin Oliver, Malcolm Rodriguez, Brock Martin, Colby Harvell-Peel, and Jason Taylor. If Sanders could improve as a passer, the team could do some damage, thanks to Jim Knowles' opportunistic defense. I hesitate to use the word weirdly, but it's the first one that comes to mind when describing Oklahoma State's start to the 2021 season. Missouri State almost made a late comeback to beat the Pokes with Shane Illingworth under center, but Oklahoma State held on to a 23-16 lead. Sanders then came back from injury against Tulsa, but OSU found themselves down 14-7 going into the fourth. Then Sanders tossed a score, LD Brown took a kickback 98 yards, and Warren shook off 3 tacklers to score the game-sealing touchdown, securing a 28-23 win. In the next game, Oklahoma State led Boise State 21-20 at halftime. Neither team scored another point. Nothing against those teams, but it was a weird start, leaving many wondering if Oklahoma State was legit. Well, they had 3 straight games against ranked teams after that, including a game at DKR. Now, the Cowboys didn't blow anybody out, but they did pick up 3 relatively comfortable wins over 25th ranked K-State, 21st ranked Baylor, and 25th ranked Texas. And while Sanders still struggled with picks, he and Jalen Warren were becoming a dynamic duo, while Tay Martin, Rashad Owens, and Brennan Presley were giving opposing secondaries fits. And a defense that consistently forced turnovers didn't hurt either. Oklahoma State was 6-0 and ranked 8th overall heading into, where else, Ames, Iowa. No big deal, right? Unlike the previous year, Sanders and Purdy were dealing, tossing for over 500 yards and 5 touchdowns between them. And Sanders connected with Tay Martin for a TD midway through the fourth to take a 21-17 lead. Then Breece Hall shook loose to get Iowa State back in front 24-21, and Will McDonald sacked Sanders twice in the ensuing possession to seal the W. Just like 2011, Iowa State ruined the Pokes' chances at a perfect season. In the words of Michael Jordan, Oklahoma State took that personally. They ripped off 4 straight massive wins, dominating Kansas, West Virginia, TCU, and Texas Tech on both sides of the ball. Over that 4-game stretch, the Cowboys gave up 23 points and scored 165. That made them 10-1 heading into a matchup with 10th-ranked Oklahoma at Boone Pickens. Caleb Williams cooked for 252 yards and 3 scores, while Sanders struggled with 2 picks to 1 TD. That helped give OU a 33-24 lead heading into the fourth. Then, Sanders ran for 37 yards to bring the Pokes within 2. After forcing an OU punt, Jalen Warren ran in another score to put OSU up 37-33. The 2 teams traded punts, and then the Cowboys stopped the Sooners on downs twice to secure the win. It did get spicy at the end after Williams broke off a 56-yard run to get within scoring range, but Colin Oliver sacked the future first overall pick on 4th down with 8 seconds left to secure the win and Oklahoma State's spot in the Big 12 championship game against Baylor. Between the 2 teams, Oklahoma State had won the regular season matchup, but it was close, so it wasn't a huge surprise when Baylor rushed out to a 21-6 lead going into the half. Still, the Cowboys made a push late, scoring 10 points to get within 5, despite Sanders throwing 2 of his 4 interceptions in the third. With 3 minutes on the clock, the Cowboys got the ball back and drove down the field, getting a 1st and goal on the Baylor 2 with 1 minute remaining. Desmond Jackson was stuffed twice, and Sanders missed on a pass to Tyler Lacey, which set up a 4th and goal. Jackson got one last try, but came up agonizingly short, giving the Bears the Big 12 title and keeping Oklahoma State out of the college football playoffs. They did beat Notre Dame 37-35 in the Fiesta Bowl, with Sanders throwing for 371 yards and 4 TDs while rushing for 125 yards, but it still felt like a letdown given how close they'd gotten to having a shot to play for a national title. Colby Harvell-Peel, Malcolm Rodriguez, and long snapper Matt Hembrow were all named All-Americans after the season. And the next year was gonna be rough. Jalen Warren, who ran for 1,216 yards and 11 scores, was off to the NFL. He wasn't drafted, but he's starting for the Steelers as of 2025. Leading receiver Tay Martin, who grabbed 80 catches for 1,046 yards and 10 scores, was also gone. He's been less successful, but is on Washington's practice squad in 2025. Plus, defenders like Malcolm Rodriguez, Devin Harper, and Christian Holmes were all gone, leaving the back 7 with much less talent. Rodrigo is still playing with the Lions, who drafted him in the 6th round. Harper isn't with the team in 2025, but Holmes is on the Browns practice squad. That said, they still had Sanders and Presley on offense, and guys like Colin Oliver and Jason Taylor on defense, but they needed to reload. Unfortunately, Jim Knowles, who had led a great defense the last few seasons, was off to Ohio State. Former Auburn DC Derek Mason was taking his place and switching to a 3-4, making guys like Oliver and Nick Martin very important. 2022 started with a 58-44 win over Central Michigan that really wasn't that close, as CMU put up 22 fourth quarter points after the Pokes had turned off the gas. Dominic Richardson led the team to a 34-17 win with 133 yards and 1 score on the ground against Arizona State. Sanders and Gunnar Gundy combined for 400 yards passing and 6 touchdowns against Arkansas Pine Bluff. Plus, Ollie Gordon flashed with 65 yards and 1 score on just 3 carries in the 63-7 win. Then they got some revenge over Baylor with a 36-24 win the next week, and crushed Texas Tech's hope of an upset with a phenomenal fourth quarter in a 41-31 win. Oklahoma State went up big on TCU, 24-13 heading into the half, but could not slow the Horned Frogs down in the fourth, giving away 14 points to send the game to OT. Both teams scored in the first, but after the Pokes hit a field goal to start the second overtime, TCU answered with a Kendre Miller touchdown to take the win. The Cowboys rebounded with another late-game surge to beat Texas. Sanders threw 2 massive touchdowns in the fourth to secure that win, and looked like he might be becoming a true star. Then the Pokes played K-State. They lost 40-0, with Sanders playing poorly and the depleted running game unable to do anything. Even worse, Sanders got injured. Garrett Rangel took the reins against Kansas, but Oklahoma State turned the ball over 4 times en route to a 37-16 loss. Gunnar Gundy got the start against Iowa State and struggled, so Sanders was brought into the game and threw a TD to win it 24-14. Sanders was back in the starting lineup against OU, but Dylan Gabriel got the Sooners out in front early with 28 first quarter points. Granted, they didn't score again, but Oklahoma State couldn't overcome Sanders' 4 INTs and lost 28-13. Sanders was out against West Virginia, so Rangel was back in as the starter. He didn't play well, but Ollie Gordon finally got the rushing game in order with 136 yards and a score. Still, the Mountaineers won 24-19. Sanders entered the transfer portal before the Guaranteed Rate Bowl game against Wisconsin, who to be fair, had just lost their coach. And where Rangel almost led a fourth quarter comeback, the Badgers defenders closed it with a pick, preserving the 24-17 win. 2022 was always going to be a struggle, with so many players leaving on both sides of the ball, not to mention Knowles taking the Ohio State job, but the team was still ranked 12th to start the season, largely based on the strength of Sanders' 2021 performance. To see him struggle so much, and hear reports that he was kind of a stain on the locker room thanks to his attitude, made it a tough season for Oklahoma State fans. Unfortunately for Sanders, he couldn't get it going when he transferred to Ole Miss and wasn't drafted. Jason Taylor was the only All-American in 2022, and the Rams picked him in the 7th round. As of 2025, he's on the Chiefs practice squad. The Jags picked defensive end Tyler Lacey in the 4th round, and he's with the Lions as of 2025. While the Pokes were going to rely on a lot of guys who'd been on the team the previous season, Gundy was slowly starting to come around to the transfer portal. Still probably too slowly, but bringing in Alan Bowman to play quarterback was at least a small step. And Gundy had plenty of experience with the young signal caller, after seeing him play at Texas Tech for 2 years before he moved to Michigan. That said, Bowman wasn't the locked-in starter from day one. In the first game against Central Michigan, Bowman, Rangel, and Gunnar Gundy split time. Even more puzzling, Ollie Gordon only got 7 carries in the 27-13 win. Gundy kept rotating his quarterbacks in the 27-15 win over Arizona State. It was working in those games, but then the Pokes lost 33-7 against South Alabama. It was a pitiful showing from all 3 quarterbacks, but it was clear someone needed to take the reins. Technically, Bowman was the one that stepped up against Rocco Becht and Iowa State, but the real revelation was that Gundy and his staff finally started giving Ollie Gordon carries. He racked up 121 yards in the 34-27 loss. It wasn't a win, but Gundy had finally settled on something, and it worked. The Pokes won 4 straight games, with Gordon averaging over 200 yards a game. Sure, the games were close because the defense was giving up plenty of yards, but they were winning. That led to a game against 10th ranked OU and Dillon Gabriel. In the final Bedlam, as of 2025, OU held a 4-point lead heading into the fourth. Then, Ollie Gordon pounded in a 2-yard score, and Alex Hale hit a field goal. OU answered with a field goal of their own to trim the Cowboys' lead to 3, but Oklahoma State held firm, stuffing Drake Stoops 2 yards short of the first down marker to seal the 27-24 win. Gordon ran for 138 yards and 2 scores. Rashad Owens had 10 catches and 136 yards, while Brennan Presley had 8 catches and 97 yards of his own. The defense forced 3 fumbles, and Oklahoma State has eternal bragging rights, at least until the schools eventually schedule another matchup in a decade or so. As Gundy said after the game, it's good for the Oklahoma State people to finish Bedlam with a win, period. Then, Oklahoma State lost 45-3 to UCF, bringing them crashing back down to earth. Gordon got back on track with 164 yards and 3 scores in a 43-30 win over Houston, putting up 166 yards and 5 scores in the 40-34 win over BYU. However, Texas held the star running back to 34 yards on 13 carries, helping secure a 49-21 beatdown in the Big 12 Conference Championship. The Pokes got out in front of Texas A&M early in the Texas Bowl, doing just enough to hold off a TAMU comeback attempt and end the season with a 31-23 win. Ollie Gordon finished the season with a nation-leading 1,732 yards and 22 touchdowns to make the All-American team and win the Doak Walker Award. Gordon, Bowman, Presley, Owens, Nick Martin, and Colin Oliver were all coming back. They started the 2024 season ranked 17th overall, and many thought they might challenge for the Big 12 title, especially with Texas and OU off to the SEC. Heading into the 2024 season, Gundy hadn't had a losing season since 2005. Before he arrived, the team had 3 10-win seasons in more than 100 years. He had put up 8 more of them during his career. To say Gundy put the program on the map probably isn't true. The program was trending well with Les Miles, and had been good at times, especially in the 80s. Plus, his record against OU isn't pretty. That said, he's easily the best coach Oklahoma State has ever had, which is what made 2024 so shocking. Remember, this was not supposed to be a rebuilding season. Ollie Gordon was a legitimate Heisman contender, and Bowman had been, at worst, steady in 2023, while the defense was stout enough to keep the team in games. The season started well enough, with a 44-20 win over South Dakota State. Gordon ran for 126 yards and 3 scores, and Bowman threw 2 TDs with no picks. And while you might think the 39-31 OT win over Arkansas was a great win for the team, it came at a cost. Star linebacker Colin Oliver was knocked out for the season with a right leg injury. Plus, Gordon was held to only 49 yards, a worrying sign of things to come. The Pokes did beat Tulsa 45-10, with Bowman throwing for 5 scores, but Gordon struggled again. He was even worse against 12th ranked Utah, who held a 22-3 lead with 6 minutes to go. Then Bowman scored 2 quick TDs to make it look a little bit more interesting, but the late flurry wasn't enough. You probably know the rest of the story, so we'll go over it quickly. K-State dropped the hammer 42-20, and Oliver's linebacking partner Nick Martin was also knocked out for the year. West Virginia popped the Pokes with a 38-14 beatdown, and then BYU ripped out the Cowboys' hearts with a last-second touchdown from Jake Retzlaff to win 38-25. That was also the game Gundy tried to throw in Garrett Rangel for old time's sake because Bowman had been so bad, but he was hurt relatively early, and Old Man Allen had to go back in. Baylor was nice enough to only win by 10, but Cam Scattaboo and Sam Levitt were having none of that, dominating the Pokes 42-21. By the way, Gordon ran for 25 yards in that game. Sure, he had 121 and a score against TCU, but the team lost 38-13. Gundy decided to go with Malachi Smith against Texas Tech, and he played well. Plus, Gordon rumbled for 156 yards and 3 scores, looking like his old self. Still, the Cowboys were ripped to shreds on defense, losing 56-48. And in the season finale against Colorado, they might as well have not showed up, losing 52-0. At the end of the season, Oklahoma State didn't win a single game in the new Big 12, making for the worst season of Gundy's career. Nick Martin, Colin Oliver, Ollie Gordon, and defensive back Corey Black were all drafted. and as you would expect in modern college football, a ton of guys left in the portal. And now we're in the 2025 season, which is currently ongoing at the time of this video's release. Mike Gundy is still the coach, though he took a big pay cut and was forced by the school to hire new offensive and defensive coordinators. That said, the early returns have been, well...
On the ground and a big opening. And it's Whittington, and he might take it to the house. Noah is gone.
Here's the thing. Gundy's style of developing 3-stars into studs doesn't really work in the NIL era. The Pokes might still be decent, but they'll never look like world beaters like they did at times earlier in Gundy's career. I won't spend too much time prognosticating on when Gundy should step down, but I wouldn't be surprised if it happens soon. And when it does happen, I'll still be here, hoping to see Oklahoma State have another resurgence, just like they did in the 40s, 80s, and 2000s. Cowboys fans will always have problems with the programs at times, but at the end of the day, the Oklahoma State faithful are, say it with me, loyal and true.